Tonsorial virtual discussion today is about chain barbershops or chain salons. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, most of us are familiar with companies companies like borics, supercuts, mastercuts, Regis, Floyds 99. Regis also has a barbershop chain called the Roosters Men Grooming Center. So all of these establishments have typically multiple locations throughout the country and perhaps even further distributed locations. But for North America is basically kind of what I'm talking about here. So Regis is the largest of such conglomerates. It has many of the brands that I've already mentioned in its portfolio of offerings. So supercuts, borics. I'm not sure if Fantastic Sam's is one of their companies or not, but many of the companies are original to Regis, and some of them they have bought up over the years. So what does it mean for a barber to work for one of these type of establishments? Well, for 30 years or so, I've been cutting hair, and up until recently, I had never had the opportunity to work for one of these chain style organizations. So recently, last year, I hired in at a chain barbershop. This particular establishment has over about 150 locations. And I was able to learn what that means to work for a chain salon, particularly in this case as a W-2 employee, as opposed to how I've previously worked as a barber, which is typically as a booth renter or a contract personnel, meaning that I would keep a certain percentage or split of the business's revenues, or rather not the business's revenues, but my actual service revenues, okay? So I wrote an article about this, which is far more extensive than I feel is, appropriate for a YouTube video. But I just want to hit on some of the highlights. Obviously, there were things. I will say this too, that my employment with the chain barbershop it ceased. I am no longer employed there, and let's just like to kind of sum up some of the things that observations I made and things that you might find interesting and noteworthy if you're going to perhaps work for one of these type of establishments, or if you're considering it, right? So one of the things that give it initial appeal is just what I had mentioned earlier, is that our W-2, I was an employee. So right away, the big difference there is when you show up to work, you're on the clock. You're getting paid. You're getting paid an hourly rate at a minimum. And ideally, you want to be servicing patrons, and that's where you kind of improve upon that hourly rate by getting tips or perhaps commissions on sales of products or upgrades or upsales of services. So, but you have more or less guaranteed, if you will, when you come to work, you know that you're going to be paid something, right? So in the past, when I have otherwise worked as a booth renter or commission personnel, well, I might show up depending on the location, depending on the season, depending on the day of the week. You may stay there for 8 hours and only see 2 people. Most people want to not admit that that could happen in the business, but that's very possible, especially just starting out, trying to build a clientele. Or say you move from one location to another, you move from one state to another, you show up at a new salon, no one knows you, you spend 8 hours there renting a booth or on a commission status, and you only see 2 people. So for 8 hours, you may leave home with not even enough Uber money to get back home if you're catching an Uber or a Lyft, right? So right away, the appeal of these type of companies is that they pay you an hourly rate, at least to give you something for your time. If you're going to sit in their establishment all day and for reasons not your fault, there's no patrons, there's no clients, you're going to be paid. So that was that is kind of the appeal, I think, for most people with these type of businesses. The other thing is that they tend to have great locations, right? the idea of franchising and having multiple locations is an old concept, right? It's not new. Kind of come into vogue with companies like McDonald's hamburgers, right? So the traditional understanding of those who own these type of enterprises, they know that they have to have great locations. So that's one thing you'll typically get by working for a chain barbershop or a chain salon. You're going to probably be in a great location. Great locations can overcome other detractors, like maybe not having the best skills or having the most talented workers. You still have foot traffic because it's a great location. It's close to where people are. It's close to where people who have money are. They do demographic studies. They're not going to locate one of these establishments in a unfruitful or unproductive place. So that is an advantage to working for one of these places. You tend to probably have more walk-ins. You probably tend to have more turnover of new business. So those are some of the advantages. What were some of the quick disadvantages? I can't really go into all of what I talked about in the article, but I'll tell you one thing that was like a major detractor for me, and what I felt like was a defect of the particular, in terms of the particular company that I work for. They just kind of are trying to get more out of an hour than is there. In other words, I felt like the expectations were unreasonable in terms of what they really wanted you to do in certain periods of a certain amount of time. So here's one thing I wrote in the article. The chain barbershop or salon I work for, in my opinion, had a very unrealistic expectation for me as a barber, in that I felt the company generally budgeted too little time for me to render all of the company's prescribed services to a patron. For example, I was budgeted a half hour to 1, cut the patron's hair regardless of length or style, more or less, with exception to what the company referred to as skin fades. They budgeted a little bit more time for skin fades. Otherwise, you were basically given a half an hour. Giving each client, number 2, giving each client a massage, quote unquote, shampoo. 3, giving each client a shoulder massage with an electrical vibrating massager. 4, give every client a hot lather, straight razor, neck shave. 5, sanitize your hands between each client. 6, retrieve a broom and dustpan to sweep up hair after each client. 7, sanitize or sterilize all tools, combs, barber chair, brushes, razors, etc. prior to use on each client. 8, style the client's hair after the haircut, ideally using some product that is available for sale at the checkout counter. 9, finally, escort the client to the customer service person to be checked out, which often meant that you stayed up there and waited until other patrons serviced by other operators were checked out. So in other words, you're standing there waiting to check someone out. All this was to be achieved in 1/2 hour. So typically, I would observe other coworkers doing whatever they had to do to keep up, whether it meant letting hair pile up under their chairs for multiple clients to cutting other corners that I won't even go into, right? Up into and including bad haircuts, right? So if you're rushed and then on top of that, in the particular place that I work for, the price point was probably, I estimate, 15 to 20% less than the average haircut in the area. So you're trying to give out a lot of sugar, as my mother would say, for a dime. All of these accoutrements and pampering for a price point that was really below market. So that was one of the main detractors of the place that I work for. And I think it's similar in many of the other chain salons. The price point is usually actually really low, so low that it drives operators away from them eventually. That's the next thing I would actually like to talk about, is the high turnover of these places. They rarely retain operators, in my opinion, for the duration. They're not the type of place that you're going to be able to have a relationship with someone 10 years as a service provider, a barber for 10 years working at one of these places. Mostly even in the case with the place that I worked for, it mainly served as a proving ground and almost like a after school training place for new operators who learned their craft, got very good, and eventually moved on where they could earn a premium or improve upon their earnings by working at another place. So these places aren't really set up or constructed to really deliver the most powerful wages typically. I'm not saying it's impossible, because I believe there are some people who have carved a niche in for working at these type of places. They have worked the construct to their benefit, and more power to them. And I do believe that's accomplishment that can be achieved. So you want to look at, maybe you want to check out my article. I'm planning to put it on my website here soon. But you want to look at all the factors and weigh whether or not this is something that fits you. And it may only fit you for a period of time. As I said, the place I worked at churned over talent. It was a churn and burn type of pace. You know, people were in and out of there. It may work for you for a period. So thank you for tuning in. If you got any specific questions, love to hear it. Leave some comments. Like our video, subscribe to our channel. Thanks again for joining us here at Tonsorial Virtuoso. I'm John Roseman, signing off.